Hi, I'm Hamish Black, and welcome to Writing on Games. You know, there was such a furore surrounding the release and subsequent unrelease of PT that it was inevitable it would become the cult hit that it has. When Silent Hills was cancelled, many lamented the fact that they would never be able to download PT again, as Konami purged it from the PlayStation Store, whilst others felt that something was incomplete, that even though the end of the demo states clearly that PT bears no relation to the game it sneak announced, something remains unfinished, unsaid. I would argue, however, that this is perhaps in the game's favour. PT is a game about not knowing. It's about distorting your ideas regarding games and your role within them. It's about the uncanny, about turning the familiar into the unfamiliar. In this spooky Halloween special of Writing on Games, I want to try and exemplify just how PT so effectively got under our skin. For context, I find it somewhat fitting to compare PT to one of those 5-word horror stories you sometimes see online. There's a reason those are so effective at unsettling you. They, perhaps unwittingly, evoke the Imagist tradition, clarity of expression through economy of language. Something like "you awoke suddenly, buried alive" works perfectly because all the fat is removed. How did you get there? What happens next? It doesn't matter, your own experiences and fears will affect the outcome of the story, making the experience even more terrifying. Think about PT in the same context. You could sum up that game, initially at least, as "you're at home, she's watching." Again, you are left largely to fill in the blanks. Where PT differs, however, is in the economy of its visual and mechanical languages. In most horror games, you start off in a place of little understanding, but with a sense of purpose. There's been a viral outbreak, there are zombies everywhere, you've got to escape. You know the drill. As you proceed, the priority shifts from one of sheer panic to "let's figure out what's going on here." PT, on the other hand, starts you in a place of greater understanding, because it's a place you know. It's just you and the hallway of a house. On the surface, there's nothing unusual about this hallway. You've probably seen a million like it. It's immensely unsettling though, precisely because it is so uncanny. A smaller environment means a more focused attention to detail, and it's how this detail subtly changes that makes PT so frightening. As you repeatedly loop through the hallway, it begins to feel more and more claustrophobic, turning the home into some sort of prison. Even just by playing the sound of a locked door as you try to exit, PT hammers home the feeling of entrapment. In typical Silent Hill fashion, it's a purgatory. It shares enough qualities with the reality that we know that the unreality of it all feels especially unsettling. This unreality manifests itself in details such as the radio, perhaps the most obvious way in which the game lessens your understanding of the situation, simultaneously heightening the terror. As you approach the muffled voice, you find a newscaster describing a particularly tragic familicide. What's odd in this case is that every so often there will be a piece of information revealed that feels just a little out of place, like he's going into a little too much detail. Why would a newscaster tell us that the wife was cleaning the kitchen after making lunch as she was shot? Why does he describe the girl's good sense as she hid in the bathroom? Also, why does he say that the neighbours called 911 as opposed to just 911? These elements highlight to the player that something is not quite right. There's too much detail that it seems out of place, but not enough that the reason for it is clear to the player. The seed has been planted, you must find out more. Go around again, however, and you hear the same broadcast, expecting perhaps to hear more revealing information. But instead, your understanding becomes warped, just as the broadcast itself becomes literally distorted. Talk of the father retrieving the rifle is interrupted with phrases such as "don't touch that dial, we're just getting started," and "you can't trust the tap water," along with one of the more cryptic elements, the sequence of numbers repeated throughout the game. As the game progresses, the radio broadcasts become more and more distorted, to the point that they're near useless in terms of information. It's just one way in which the game lures the player into a false sense of security. The radio is seemingly the most reliable means of understanding the situation, but also the human voice acts as a connective tissue of sorts to the real world. You perhaps subconsciously rely on it to feel less alone in the game's purgatory, to give you something else to focus on that isn't just the game's ghostly apparition that keeps following you, Lisa. It's telling you that you know what to do as you listen to the gruesome sounds of a woman being brutally murdered. It gets you to visualise the action, heightened due to the fact that you look through a peephole in order to trigger it. Then implies responsibility, possibly for an event that hasn't even occurred yet. It's heavily implied you're the killer. Maybe you're the voice on the radio too? Maybe this voice you initially found comfort in is in your head. Eventually, you realise it has turned on you just like everything else in the environment. It's minimalist in its approach, like an early Steve Reich piece that starts out as one thing, but changes little details every so often that by the time it reaches a conclusion, it's a different beast entirely, and importantly, you didn't even realise. Eventually, you don't even care about finding out more regarding your situation. You just want to survive it, you just want to get out. The game wears down your resolve bit by subtly drawing your attention to little details, then subverting their reliability at every turn. You're never allowed to fully grasp anything within the world of PT, and as the presence of Lisa confirms, there's always the niggling feeling that you're being watched, that your strings are being pulled. What's perhaps most unsettling, however, is how your strings are being pulled from outside the game. The game's final puzzle is largely criticised for being overly cryptic. Indeed, when my friend and I played it late one night, we found it was the only part of the game we needed to use a guide for, and even then the solution proved unreliable. As we sat watching the Silent Hills teaser play out after beating it, we didn't feel satisfied having resolved the terror the game had been so effectively building up. Instead, we felt confused, like the game had so effectively immersed us in this small world and then suddenly become a game again. No, there had to be more than this. After I got home, I couldn't help but look into everything further. Nothing sat right with me. No one seemed to have any concrete proof as to what was happening. I looked through multiple forums filled with other people as confused and as desperate for answers as I was, all discussing their weird theories. I did stumble across a video by The Great Debate, which I will link to and you should totally watch because it's amazing, breaking down how the numbers worked, how it involved flipping the numbers round and codifying them, and how that played into the cryptic loading screen, and then I realised PT had encroached upon all of our lives. The reason the game so effectively gets under our collective skin isn't simply because of the uncanny nature of the environment, or the terrifying appearances of Lisa. It's because it takes the game out of the game and makes us carry it around with us. I only played the game once, but I can't stop thinking about it. Hideo Kojima is the father. We are the daughter having the good sense to hide in the bathroom, trying not to let ourselves be taken in, but then he lures us out only to shoot us point blank in the goddamn chest. It's just a game. All this from just a hallway. Through the economy of its visual and mechanical languages, PT says far more with far less than most games. As such, it will rightly be considered a classic of the horror genre. So there you have it, my thoughts on a game that I've wanted to talk about for a long time because, as I hope I've gotten across in this video, it sticks with you. Now, I'd just like to express my unbelievable gratitude to all my new subscribers, the thousands and thousands of new subscribers, holy shit. Also, a massive thank you to all my patrons, new and old, for supporting the show financially. Now, a big thank you to Jonathan for picking the subject for this episode after pledging a certain amount, and thank you so much to everyone, you really allow me to keep doing this, thank you so much. Now, if you want your name in the end scroll, access to the soundtracks and scripts, or early access to the episodes themselves, please check out the Patreon. Every pledge helps me more than you can possibly know. And with all of that said, my name is Hamish Black, and this has been Writing on Games. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.